I am Mason Harper, 34 years old, currently living in a luxury high-rise in downtown Chicago. Last year, I sold my cybersecurity startup for $5 million, a sum large enough to allow me to live comfortably for the rest of my life without needing to do anything else. $5 million in the bank, no wife, no children. Life seemed to have reached the pinnacle of perfection. But no, the relationship between me and my father is the dark stain bleeding through the pages of that success story. My father, Richard Harper, was once a prominent commercial real estate developer, but after a series of failed projects during the 2008 recession, he became bitter and controlling. Not controlling my life, but controlling my wallet. In his eyes, I am not a son, but a walking ATM machine. This morning I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the navy blue button-down that my mother loved. Today is her birthday, and as usual, the whole family will gather at the old colonial house in the suburbs of Milwaukee. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the heavy feeling that always comes when I think about facing my father, the man who in all my life has never hugged me, never asked if I was okay, and only ever looked at me as if I were a walking vault. In truth, that's still far kinder than how he treated me when I was a child. He was an alcoholic, and whenever he was drunk, he would drag me out to the garage and beat me with his belt. No reason, no warning. Those memories are etched into me like scars that never heal. And every time I face him, those scars throb again. I drove my Tesla Model S smoothly along tree-lined Lakeshore Drive, the afternoon sunlight dancing on the windshield. I turned on the radio, trying to let the music drown out the tangled mess of thoughts in my head. When I pulled up in front of the familiar white Colonial with its black shutters, my mother was already standing at the door, her smile as radiant as always. "Mason, you're here," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a tight hug. The familiar scent of her vanilla perfume warmed my heart, as if it soothed some of the wounds within me. The party took place in the backyard. String lights hung delicately between the oak trees. Cheerful laughter mingled with the soft strains of jazz from the outdoor speakers. My mother, Caroline, was the center of everyone's attention. At 60, she still exuded grace, her auburn hair styled elegantly, her green eyes sparkling with warmth. I looked at her, silently grateful that no matter how the world turned upside down, my mother remained my anchor. My father, as usual, stood in a corner of the patio, a glass of scotch in hand, his cold gaze sweeping over the crowd. He wore a charcoal gray suit, still looking distinguished, but his smile always sent a chill down my spine. I tried to avoid him, focusing on chatting with my cousins from Wisconsin, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes following my every step. "Mason!" My father's voice rang out as I was getting some of Mom's famous potato salad from the buffet table. I turned around to see him approaching a glass of deep red wine in his hand. "Have a drink with your father's son, a special glass just for you." He emphasized the word special, his smirk making me uneasy. I took the glass, my fingers gripping it tightly. "Thanks, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother was nearby, laughing with Aunt Patricia, and I didn't want to do anything to worry her. I raised the glass and took a sip. The wine was rich, slightly bitter, but nothing seemed unusual. I looked at my father. He nodded as if he had just completed a task. Just a few minutes later, my head began to spin. Everything around me became blurry, the laughter and chatter of the guests echoing as if from a distant place. My heart pounded. My breathing grew heavy, as if the air was being sucked from my lungs. "Mom," I whispered, trying to walk toward her, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stumbled, the wineglass falling to the patio stones and shattering. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the old bed in my childhood bedroom upstairs. My head throbbed. My body felt drained of all strength. My mother sat beside me, her hands tightly clutching mine, her eyes red and swollen. "Mason, are you okay?" Oh God, I was so scared. Her voice trembled as if she had just lived through a nightmare. "What happened?" I mumbled, trying to piece things together. The image of the wineglass, my father's smile, and the dizziness came rushing back like a wave. I looked at my mother, searching for answers in her eyes, but she only shook her head, stroking my hair the way she did when I was a child. You passed out on the patio. Your father said you drank too much, but I know you didn't. You only had one glass, didn't you? She looked at me, her eyes full of worry. I nodded, my throat dry. One glass, just one glass of wine from Dad. I held my mother's hand, feeling her fingers tremble slightly. The room was silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I wanted to say something to reassure her, but I was drowning in a sea of doubt myself. That glass of wine, my father's cold smile, and the sensation of being drained of life all were pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet fit together. Mason, I'm so worried, my mother said, her voice softening as if afraid someone outside might hear. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the backyard where I had collapsed. What you went through, the dizziness, the shortness of breath, losing consciousness. I've seen it before. It was just like my father. I froze, my heart pounding. Grandpa Frank? I asked, my voice hoarse. I had only met him a few times as a child, a tall man with a booming laugh who owned several manufacturing plants. But my mother had told me he died suddenly when she was young. A heart attack, she had said. She turned back to me, her eyes red, her hands clasped tightly, as if to keep herself from falling apart. Yes, my father collapsed like that too, after a dinner party with business associates. He was healthy, Mason, just like you. No illnesses, no warning signs. But the next morning he didn't wake up. Her voice trembled, each word seeming to be dredged up from an old buried pain. I stood and walked to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Mom, I don't think it was an illness. I hesitated, unsure whether to voice the suspicion screaming in my head, but her eyes, filled with both fear and hope, compelled me to speak. I get annual physicals. You know that. My heart, my blood work, everything's normal. No signs of any hereditary conditions. She looked at me, her eyes widening as if she had just realized something horrific. Then, what do you think happened? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, feeling as though I were standing on the edge of a cliff. Mom, I think there was something in that glass of wine Dad gave me. The words spilled out, and I saw her step back, her hand covering her mouth, her face paling. Mason, what are you saying? Richard is your father. Her voice was filled with pain, but I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But didn't you notice he kept emphasizing that the glass was special? I drank it, and then I collapsed. I wasn't drunk, Mom. I only took one sip. I paused, looking directly into her eyes. You thought it was strange too, didn't you? Dad said I drank too much, but you know the truth. My mother sank into the old rocking chair, her trembling hands clutching a mug of cold tea. She was silent, but I could see the struggle within her, between her loyalty to my father and her maternal instincts. I don't want to believe it, she said, her voice breaking. But it's true. I did find it odd. Your father insisted you were drunk, but I looked at you and I knew you weren't. We sat there in silence like two weary travelers lost in a storm. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. Mom, I'll find out what happened. I don't want to suspect Dad, but I need to know the truth. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Be careful, Mason. If you're right, I won't let anyone hurt you. After the conversation with my mother, I felt like I was walking a tightrope, each step precarious. The suspicion about my father clung to me like a shadow, but I had no proof. Only the glass of wine, his cold smile, and the gut feeling that I had narrowly escaped death. I wanted to forget, to believe it was all in my imagination, but every time I looked in the mirror, I saw my own eyes, the eyes of someone who couldn't let this go. Thanksgiving arrived, bringing with it the biting cold of November in the Midwest. My mother called, her voice gentle but filled with hope. Mason, come home for dinner, will you? Just one evening. I wanted to refuse, to stay far away from the house now, shrouded in darkness, but I couldn't bear to disappoint her. I'll come, I said, though my heart felt heavy as lead. The old colonial appeared under the glow of dusk, warm light spilling from the windows like beacons. I stepped inside, the smell of roasted turkey and apple pie filling the air, but it did nothing to warm the chill in my bones. My mother hugged me, her smile still radiant, but I saw the worry hidden in her eyes. My father sat at the head of the dining table, a glass of red wine in hand, his gray suit impeccably pressed. He looked at me, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Mason feeling better after that little incident in the garden?" His voice was even, but I could hear the mockery in it. I sat across from him, forcing a calm expression. "I'm fine, Dad, thanks." But my hands clenched under the table, my nails digging into my palms. My mother bustled about, bringing out dishes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes with marshmallows. Her chatter with Aunt Patricia filled the air, but my focus was solely on my father. His gaze followed me like a predator stalking its prey. When the main course was served, my father stood raising his glass. "To family, to Thanksgiving," he said, his eyes locked on mine. He handed me a glass of red wine, its color glinting under the chandelier light like fresh blood. "Drink, Mason. This one's special." The word special rang out identical to the night of my mother's birthday. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming danger. I wouldn't let it happen again. I took the glass, my fingers trembling slightly. My mother was in the kitchen getting the pumpkin pie. My father watched me, his gaze challenging. In that moment, I knew I had to act. I pretended to drop my napkin, bending down to pick it up, and in a split second I swapped my glass with his on the table. The movement was lightning fast, unnoticed by anyone. I sat up straight, my heart pounding like a drum, sweat trickling down my forehead. My father raised his glass, took a large sip, then turned to talk to Uncle Paul about the Bears season. I gripped his glass, now mine, but didn't drink. I waited, watching. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, nothing. I started to think I was paranoid, but then about 45 minutes later, my father stopped mid-sentence. He clutched his chest, his breathing labored. "Richard, what's wrong?" my mother cried, rushing to his side. He staggered, the wine glass falling to the floor and shattering. He clutched his head, his face ashen, then collapsed onto the hardwood floor. My mother's scream tore through the air. The dining room erupted into chaos, Aunt Patricia calling 911. I shot to my feet, but not out of fear, because a horrifying truth was dawning on me. The dizziness, shortness of breath, fainting. Just like me on my mother's birthday, just like my grandfather, as my mother had described. "Call an ambulance now," I shouted, but my eyes stayed fixed on my father. He lay on the floor, his breathing faint, his glassy eyes staring at me. In that moment, I saw a flicker of panic in his gaze, as if he knew what he had just drunk. The paramedics arrived within minutes, loading him onto a stretcher. My mother sobbed, clutching my hand. "Mason, what's happening? Why is this happening?" I hugged her, but my mind was reeling. If I hadn't swapped the glasses, I would be the one on that stretcher. The thought hit me like a sledgehammer. "Mom, I need to take a sample of the wine from that glass," I whispered. She looked at me, her eyes filled with horror, but she nodded. I knew she was thinking what I was thinking. When everyone had left for the hospital, I quietly collected a sample of the wine left in my father's glass, the one meant for me. I poured it into a small specimen container I found in the bathroom and tucked it into my pocket. That night, I didn't sleep. The image of my father collapsing his eyes and the red wine haunted me. I was right. My father had tried to poison me, and now I would prove it. The days following Thanksgiving, I lived like a man on the run, not fleeing from someone else, but from my own thoughts. The image of my father collapsing, the panic in his eyes, and the small container of wine I kept in my jacket pocket haunted me. Each night, I lay staring at the ceiling of my Chicago apartment, wondering if I was going insane or if I had truly come close to dying at my father's hands. But I knew I couldn't stop. I needed the truth, even if it tore our family apart. I contacted a private laboratory in downtown Chicago, a discreet place I'd heard about from colleagues in the tech industry. I didn't dare send the wine sample through the mail, too risky. Instead, I drove there myself, the container tucked in my jacket pocket like a tiny grenade. The technician, a middle-aged woman with horn-rimmed glasses, looked at me curiously as I handed her the container. I need it tested for any unusual substances, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. As fast as possible. She nodded, asking no questions. 3 days, she said. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I returned to my apartment, locked the door, and drew the blinds as if afraid my father might appear at any moment. My mother called, her voice frail. Mason, your father's doing better. The hospital said he went into some kind of shock, but they couldn't find a cause. Do you know anything? I heard the doubt in her voice, but I didn't dare tell her yet. I'm looking into it, Mom, don't worry. But I was the one consumed with worry. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was the technician. Mr. Harper, we have the results. You should come in. Her voice was cold, professional, but I sensed the gravity behind it. I raced to the lab, my heart pounding. She handed me a report, pointing to a highlighted line, barbiturate, high concentration. It's a sedative, she explained. This dose was enough to cause unconsciousness, even death, if not treated in time. I stood frozen, the paper trembling in my hand. Barbiturate, not alcohol, not drunkenness, not illness. Someone had deliberately put a sedative in my glass of wine, and I knew who. I looked at the technician, forcing my voice to stay calm. Thank you, please keep this confidential. She nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. On the drive back, I took the long way around Lake Michigan, my mind churning. My father, the man who raised me, the man I had once tried desperately to please despite his coldness. Wow, then I remembered my wealth. $5 million, no wife, no children. If I died, my father would be the legal beneficiary as my next of kin. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. He didn't just want to control me. He wanted me gone. I parked by Montrose Harbor, watching the waves crash against the concrete barriers. The cold wind blew off the lake, but I felt nothing except the anger burning inside me. My father had tried to kill me not once, but twice, and if I hadn't swapped the glasses on Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be standing here. I gripped the report tightly, resolved. I would confront him not for revenge, but so that my mother and I could finally be free. My father was discharged from Northwestern Memorial Hospital a week later, looking weaker but with eyes still sharp as broken glass. My mother wanted me to visit, but I knew this wasn't an ordinary visit. I brought the lab report tucked in my jacket pocket like a shield. As I stepped into the old colonial, I saw my mother in the kitchen preparing coffee. Mason, you're here? She smiled, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. Your father's in the living room. I nodded, took a deep breath, and walked in. My father was seated in his leather recliner, a glass of wine again in his hand. He looked at me, that familiar smirk curling his lips. Mason, come to visit your old man. That's good of you. His voice was light, but I could sense the weariness beneath it. I need to talk to you, privately, I said, my voice firm. My mother was in the kitchen, out of earshot. He raised an eyebrow, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out the lab report and placed it on the coffee table in front of him. Barbiturate, I said, staring into his eyes. In the wine you gave me on Thanksgiving, enough to kill. Explain. His face stiffened, but he quickly regained his composure. What are you talking about, Mason? Poison? You've lost your mind. He laughed, but the laugh was forced, unable to mask the panic in his eyes. Don't lie, I said, my voice cold as Lake Michigan in January. I swapped the glasses with you. That's why you collapsed, not me. I have proof. The lab confirmed it. If you don't tell the truth, I'm taking this to the police. Silence. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock and my father's heavy breathing filled the room. Then, like a dam breaking, he slumped forward, his hands covering his face. Mason, forgive me, he whispered, his voice cracking. I only meant to knock you out. I was going to forge documents, transfer your assets. I'm drowning in debt, Mason. The real estate market destroyed me. I had no way out. I stood there looking at the man who was once my father, now just a desperate shell. His confession cut like a knife, but strangely I didn't feel anger, only a deep, profound sadness. Why, Dad? I asked, my voice hoarse. I'm your son. He didn't answer, only bowed his head, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. I thought of my mother, of the years she spent living with a man like him. I wanted to call the police to make him pay, but I knew it would destroy her. "I won't go to the police," I said, my voice trembling. "But from now on, stay away from me, and don't ever hurt Mom." I turned and walked away, leaving him in the cold room. As I stepped out, I saw my mother standing at the door, her face pale. She had heard everything. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble. "Mason," she whispered, but said nothing more. I knew from that moment everything would change forever. I left the living room, leaving my father sitting there, his head bowed like a broken man. His confession echoed in my mind, each word a fresh wound. I had thought confronting him would bring relief, but it didn't, only pain, heavy and suffocating. As I stepped into the hallway, trying to hold myself together, I saw my mother standing at the kitchen doorway, her hands gripping the frame, her face ashen. "Mason." Her voice trembled, her eyes red and brimming with tears. I froze. She had heard it all, the confrontation, my father's confession, everything. I walked to her, wrapping her in my arms, feeling her shake against me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if she were the one at fault. "I never imagined Richard could." I led her to the sunroom where her orchids bloomed in the afternoon light. We sat on the wicker love seat, the silence broken only by the wind chimes on the porch. I held her hand, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath, her voice steadier. "Mason, I heard everything. What your father said. I can't believe it, but there's something I need to tell you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with both pain and determination. "The symptoms you had on my birthday, they were exactly like my father's. He collapsed too after a business dinner with Richard." She paused, as if summoning the courage to continue. "My father died soon after. Everyone said it was a heart attack, but I always found it strange. He was healthy, no illnesses. And after he died, Richard inherited a significant portion of my family's business through our marriage. The manufacturing plants, the patents, everything." I felt my blood turn to ice. "You suspect Dad was involved in Grandpa Frank's death?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't want to think it, Mason. I loved your father. I wanted to believe in him, but now I'm afraid I've been living with a monster." Her words were like a cold wind, stripping away any remaining illusions. I hugged her tighter, feeling her pain merge with mine. "Mom, if you're right, we need to find the truth," I said, my voice firm. "Not just for me, but for Grandpa Frank and for you." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I'll help you, Mason. No matter what happens, I want to know the truth." We sat there under the pale November sun, mother and son, now allies in a battle neither of us could have foreseen. I knew the road ahead would be painful, but I was no longer afraid. With my mother by my side, I was ready to face anything. The day after our conversation, my mother and I began our quest for the truth. We didn't talk much, only acted like two detectives on a cold case. I suggested starting with the safe in my father's home office, where he kept important documents. My mother agreed, though I saw her hands shake as she opened the door to that room. "I rarely come in here," she said softly. "Richard didn't like me touching his papers." The safe sat behind a false panel in the bookshelf, a massive steel vault. My mother knew the combination, their anniversary date, a detail that twisted my heart. Inside, we found real estate deeds, contracts, and an old leather journal with worn edges. "This was my father's diary," my mother whispered, her hands trembling as she opened the pages. The neat handwriting of my grandfather emerged, chronicling his final days. One entry stopped us cold. "November 15th. Richard's acting strange. Last night after dinner I felt dizzy, short of breath after the brandy he poured. I suspect he means me harm. If something happens to me, investigate." My mother and I looked at each other, speechless. My grandfather's words, like a message from beyond the grave, confirmed our worst fears. "Mom, we need professionals," I said. I contacted a private investigator, James Mitchell, who had helped a friend with corporate espionage. I also called a criminal attorney, Sarah Chen, who specialized in cold cases. Both agreed to meet with us. Mitchell suggested exhuming my grandfather's medical records and tissue samples if any remained. If there was poison, traces could still be found even after all these years, he said. With Chen's help, we obtained a court order. The process was grueling, but the final results hit like a tsunami. The tissue analysis revealed that my grandfather had been poisoned with a barbiturate, the same class of sedative found in my wine. Not a heart attack. Not natural causes. Murder. We dug deeper. Mitchell uncovered forged documents in my father's inheritance record signatures that didn't match transfer agreements dated suspiciously close to my grandfather's death. Each piece of evidence was another nail in my father's coffin. My mother sat beside me, reading each document, her face growing harder. I lived with him for over 30 years, she said, her voice breaking. I knew nothing, Mason. I took her hand. It's not your fault. He deceived us both. But I saw fire in her eyes. Not grief, but determination. She was no longer the submissive wife. She was a mother, a daughter seeking justice. My mother didn't hesitate. I'll press charges, she said, her voice steady as steel. Not just for you, but for my father. Richard has to pay. I had never seen her so strong. We prepared everything with Chen and Mitchell. The file was thick, the lab report on the wine, my grandfather's diary, the tissue analysis, and the forged documents. Each page built an ironclad case against my father. The trial took place on a gray February day in downtown Chicago. I sat beside my mother in the courtroom, holding her hand, feeling her ice-cold fingers. My father stood at the defendant's table, no longer the powerful man I once knew. He looked aged, his eyes hollow, but he still tried to maintain his innocence. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice weak. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah Chen laid out every detail: the wine laced with barbiturate, the attempt on my life, my grandfather's diary, the tissue analysis proving he'd been poisoned, and the forged documents showing my father had stolen the family business. The prosecutor called my mother to the witness stand. She stood tall, her voice clear, recounting the years of living with a manipulative husband and the pain of learning he had murdered her father. I watched her, my heart swelling with pride mixed with sorrow. My father had no chance. The jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilty. Attempted murder in the first degree for me and murder in the first degree for my grandfather. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, he turned to look at my mother and me, his eyes empty. I felt no triumph, only a void where our family once stood. After the trial, my mother moved in with me in Chicago. The old colonial was sold away for us to close the door on the past. My mother found peace free from my father's manipulation. She started a rooftop garden growing herbs and flowers, and every afternoon we sat drinking tea, talking about simple things. I looked at her, seeing her smile return, though tinged with lingering sadness. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked one day as the sunset painted the Chicago skyline gold. She nodded, squeezing my hand. "I'm okay, Mason. Justice has been served. My father can rest in peace, and you're safe. That's all I need." I found peace too. Though the scars from my father would never fully heal, I continued building my next venture, this time a non-profit teaching cybersecurity to underprivileged youth. But now I lived for my mother, for the simple moments we shared. Under the glow of the setting sun over Lake Michigan, I knew we had emerged from the darkness together.